Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoons, everybody. Welcome back to English Debates. The last meeting we had formats of the debates. We discussed about the American formats of debates and then the Asian formats of debates. Now we are going to go straight to the debate itself. Start from the debate preparations. So our purpose of today's lecture is to make you understand about how to win the debates from the preparations. Okay. These sessions we will focus on one part of the preparations, that is issues and definitions. Okay. Now let's go to the first slide. Okay, to win the debates, you need to consider two things. The first is you have to give good reasons why your side of motion is true. So you have to make sure to convince the audience or the judge that your arguments is stronger, that your arguments is true. But it is not enough. You have to do the second. What is that? You have to be able to show why your opposition's reasons are wrong, why your opponent's reasons are wrong. In other words, that you have to show that your opponent's arguments are weak. That's it. That's the points of how to win the debate. Now, how to do that? You need to consider some step to win. The first is you must have a good definition first. Okay, so because every debate starts with a definition, so you have to be able to make a good definition first. And then the second, beside making definitions, you have to be able to make the arguments. Yeah, you have to say the reasons why you reject the motions, so you have to say the reason why you agree with the motions that are, and then all of those arguments you have to collect it, gather it into what we call as a single case approach. Okay. Next, after you make all the arguments, you make it into a single case, you have to divide that arguments into your member. So if in Asian parliamentary we had 3 members, so you have to divide the arguments at least to the first speaker and the second speaker. Because the third speaker didn't give any arguments, just the rebuttals and the summary. Okay, so at least you have to be able to split the arguments to the member. You need a strategy to do that. Okay. However, today in these sessions we only focus on the first step, that is setting the definitions. Okay. In setting the definitions, first of all, to make your definitions clear, you need to clear up the issues first. You need to identify, you need to understand better about the issues. Because if you misunderstood about the issues, the definitions will be different. We'll give you the examples later. Next, after you can identify the issue, you can understand the issues, now you can make the definitions. Okay. Now we go to how to identify the issues. Okay. There are some principles to identify the issues. The first principle is where there is a clear issue, debates that issue. In other words, you have to make the issues clear. You have to make the issues clear. You have to be able to catch the motion issues. What is the issues brought by the motions? Yeah. For example, here, this house, the motion is, this house believe that the government should ban smoking. Now the question is, to make it clear, what kinds of smoking in this motion? Is it smoking marijuana? Is it smoking means make a campfire? Is it smoking a fish? Yeah. Or what? Or is it smoking the sausage? So you have to make it clear first. Okay. Next, the next principle is find the issues that is most obvious, most relevant, or most debatable. Okay. For example, this is the extreme example. The motion is, this house believe that the carrot is better than the stick. So you have to make it obvious. What does it mean by the carrot? You have to make it relevant. Is it about the foods? Carrots mean foods. Or the stick here means wood. Is it debatable to identify carrot as a food and stick as a kind of wood that usually people use in Boy Scouts, or people used to hate somebody like that? Okay. So you have to clear it first, to make it obvious, to make it relevant and debatable. Okay. So for example, this carrot and stick in this motion is not about carrot as a food, because if you identify carrot as a food here, the issues is not relevant, the issues is not obvious. How can the food carrot here better than the stick, yeah? Or wood here? It is not relevant, or it is not debatable, right? So you have to identify these kinds of motion as metaphoricals. This is the kinds of metaphoric. Carrots stand for or symbolizing the incentive, while stick symbolizing the punishments. Usually it is used in the term of behaviorisms. Maybe when you learn about the theory of learning, yeah, you can know about stick and carrot here. To motivate someone, you need a carrot, mean you need to give appreciation, you need to give incentive, you need to give reward, and also you need to give stick. It means that sometimes to motivate person, you need to maybe make them fear of a punishment, make them avoid something by threatening, etc. Okay, that is about stick and carrots. Okay, so again, be careful with the metaphorical motions. Make it obvious, make it relevant, and make it debatable. Don't identify it in a wrong way. Next principles in identifying the issues is, where there is no obvious issues, you must choose an issues that the motions could reverse to. Okay. This case, sometimes the motion is not clear enough. The motions is so hazy. But you have to choose. You have to choose between the choices. For example, here, the motion is, this house believes that big is beautiful. The question is, when you want to identify, when you want to make a definitions from this motion. The question is, what does it mean by the big? Big is beautiful. Is it big here about the being fat? Yeah, being fat is beautiful rather than being thin, sorry. Or is it about the body image in the media? Yeah. Or is it about something else? About, for example, here is about the globalizations with the big combinations of culture, economy, politics, etc., connected all over the world. So, with the globalization, we have a big relationships in all aspects of life. Yeah. From this many interpretation, you have to choose at least one issues. Okay. So, for example, this motion, this house believe that big is beautiful. You decide, oh, big is beautiful here refers to the representations of body image in the media. For example, as you know, in our media, in advertisement and film, people like to represent the beautiful women as someone who are slim, not someone who are big, etc., not someone who are fat, etc. Okay, so the main point is you have to decide the issues when the motion give you so many alternative of definitions. Okay, next. Now, after you can clear up the issues, you can understand about the issues. Sorry. Now you go to the definition, making a definition or setting the definition. The definition in debate is different from definitions in the, for example, in the dictionary. Okay, the definition in debate here is about the meaning of motion for the purpose of debates. Okay, so definitions is the meaning of motion for purpose of debates. Okay, not for purpose of giving in information to other people, not for the purpose of, for example, giving the certainty. No, it is for debates. Okay, and then the purpose of definition, giving definition here, is to explain the words mean in the motion for your debates, yeah, to make it clear the motions, so it can be debatable. Okay. Usually, the definitions is made by the government's teams or the proposition teams, while the oppositions may agree or disagree. When the oppositions didn't give comments to the definition from the proposition or from the government, it means that the oppositions agree with the definitions and they can proceed to the debates. Okay, while if the oppositions cannot agree or disagree with the definitions offered by the prepositions, the opposition can give the alternative of definitions. Okay. So actually both sides, whether it is positive or negative, governments or oppositions, both of them have to prepare the definitions, because as you know, they can debate about the definition in the first place. Okay. Now, how to define a motion? First, when you define the motion, do not define every single words of the motions. Okay, you just take the terms in the motions. Yeah. For examples, this house believe that school student should wear uniform. So you don't have to define all the words like what is student, what is wear. No, maybe you should define what is uniform as a key term of the motions. Okay, so not all the words in the motions is defined, only the terms. Next, do not define metaphorical term literally. Okay, as the example above, this house believe that carrots is better than stick. Yeah, you cannot interpret, you cannot define the carrot as food literally or the stick as words used to hit someone. No, you have to define it metaphorically too. Okay, so you will have debatable definitions. Next, do not make definitions too complicated. Okay, usually debaters stick to the dictionary definitions, while there are lots of definition in the dictionary. Okay, or in the dictionary sometimes use difficult words, yeah, that make your definitions too complicated. Okay, so try to define the term in the motion, so not too specific or too difficult like the dictionary does. Okay, next, to make it clear about the definitions of the you make in the motions. Okay, you need to prepare the examples, okay, to make it clear the definitions that you offer. Okay. Now, in making definition, you also have to limit the motions. Okay, so for example, like this. This house believes that we are the lost generations. Okay, now you have to scope the words of lost generation. You have to limit the scopes of the word we here. Who is we here? Okay, for example, we here is Indonesians youth. So when you start to limit the word we here as the Indonesians youth, you can assume that Indonesians youth are people who born in 1990s, for example, like that. Okay, so limiting the motion here is very important, because some of the motions needs limitations, needs the certain scopes to make it debatable. Now, the case or the problem is, what about if there are no words from the motions that can be that for example cannot be limited? It means that the motion itself didn't state clearly about the limitations. So you have to define, you have to limit the motions here. For example, here, this house believes that online school are expensive. Okay, this house believes that online school are expensive. From this motion, we don't know clearly, because the motion here didn't say clearly about online school where, which area or which countries in part of the world that are expensive. So you can limit it, but not specifically to the country, no, to the certain nations, no, but more general. For example, online school are expensive here is limited on the developing countries. As we know that in developing countries here, the internet accounts is so expensive, and it has a slow speed too. So online school are expensive here, limited in the developing countries, not in the developed countries. Okay. Next. However, when you make limitations on the definition, in making definitions, you must be reasonable. Do not limit the motions, but the limitation here will cause, later we call it as a tautology, etc. Now we will discuss it later. Okay. Now, in limiting the motion, you are not allowed to first time setting or time set. It means that taking a general motion and limiting it to specific time in the past or in the future. For example, here, this house believes that capital punishment should be forbidden. Okay. You are not allowed, for example, when you are from the proposition on oppositions, offering the limitation of the motions by saying that this motions is limited to 17th century. No, you are not allowed to do that, because capital punishment should be forbidden here. It tends to be a general motions, and you are not allowed to drag it to take it to the specific time in 17th century, for example, like that. Next, you are not allowed, in limiting the motion, place setting. It is taking a general motions and setting it in a specific place that is different from that which is intended. So, for example, here, this house believes that capital punishment should be forbidden. Okay. While it is intended in Indonesia, for example, you limited it in the Saudi Arabia, for example. You limit the motion specifically to Saudi Arabia. So it is not allowed to give specific limitations, especially on the time and setting, in the general motions. Okay. So what we need in making a definition, we should try our best to make a natural definitions that is more reasonable, okay, definitions that is not give advantage on one side of the teams, definitions that will not give total disadvantage to other teams. Okay, it should be natural. It can be debated by the proposition or by the negatives. Okay. So in making definitions here, the principle, when your team is defining the motion, imagine that you are natural onlooker, not somebody participating in debates. So when you place yourself as a natural side, you will not take advantage by making a definitions that will give more profit, that will give more advantage to your teams, while give disadvantage to other teams. Okay, so try to be natural in giving a definitions, because when you give a definitions that give more advantage to your teams will lose while your opponent will win. Okay. So to make more natural, you are not allowed to make a tautology definitions or truism definition or squirrel definition. What is tautology? What is truism? Or what is squirrel? First, truism. Truism is when the topic you define is absolutely true. You aware that your definitions is absolutely true, so your opponent will not able to debate it. Okay, for examples, The motion is this house believe that the tomorrow is another day. Okay, so this is metaphorical. This is metaphorical motions that you cannot define it in literally, because when you define it literally, it becomes a truism. For example, the definitions. Tomorrow is defined as being literally the day after today. The day after today. So it will be a truism, because yes, tomorrow is day after today. It is the absolute truth that all people all over the world will say that tomorrow is day after today. The same like when you say the sun is rises in the east, all people around the world will say yes, and it cannot be debated. So it is what we call as a truisms. It is the general truth that people cannot debate it. Yeah. So in giving definitions, you are not allowed to make your definition sounds absolutely true, so the other team cannot debate you. Okay. Next, the tautology. In the tautology here means that the definitions you make here in the development will prove itself that it is true. Okay, so there will be no debate, and your opponent cannot debate it. For example, the motion is this house believe that the extremism is the catalyst for progress. Catalyst here means trigger. Okay, the house believe that the extremism is the trigger for progress. Here, for example, the definitions here by the prepositions define extremism here as the radical groups that contributes the advancement of the society, or good extremism. For example, like the extremisms of apartheid by in South Africa, the extremisms of Indonesian warrior during the Dutch colonialisms. Yeah. So when you define extremism as radical groups that contributes to advancements of the society, so there is no room for your opponents to debate it, okay, because your definitions here is prove itself to be true. Next, the squirrel. In the squirrel here, the definitions are not tied down to the spirit of the motion and do not have proper logical links to the motion. The squirrel here means that your definitions cannot relate to the motion, yeah, or doesn't reflect about the motions. For example, this house, the motion is this house would impose sanctions on Iran, and then you define Iran as a radical Islamic nation that support terrorism. Therefore, to impose sanctions on Iran means to impose sanctions radical Muslim. So when you say that Iran is Islamic nation, and Islamic nation here is support terrorism, yeah, it will be a squirrel, because these kinds of definitions will lead to for example here, that all of the Islam or all the Muslims nations are terrorists and they support terrorism, and because Muslims support terrorism, so it is right to, for example, expel or reject all the Muslims to enter a certain nations. Okay, that is squirrels. Okay, so you are not allowed to do that, yeah, because it doesn't reflect about the motions. Okay, so that's all for today. In preparations, the point is that in preparation, first you have to pay attention on how to make it clear about the issues brought by the motions, and then after you have a clear understanding about the issues in the motions, you can start defining the motion. You can start making a definitions about the motion terms. But be careful in making a definitions of the motions term, because when you are wrong in defining, for example, you make a tautology or truism or squirrels that make your opponent cannot have a room to debate, it is wrong. You